The deadline for filing your tax return is fast approaching, but many consumers are too engrossed with filing to think about what they could also do with the returns. For tips on how to best maximize any payout from the CRA, we're joined by Consolidated Credit Counseling Services of Canada Executive Director Jeff Schwartz. Jeff, good to be with you. Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome.
So a lot of different aspects that we talk about as it relates to taxes, investing, RSPs versus TFSAs. What's your message to our viewers?
Well, I think some of the prime concerns that Canadians are facing is they're heavily indebted. And in many cases, that debt is on high interest rate credit cards. It might even be on lines of credit, which means that for me, they're on the forever and ever plan. And if they're just servicing the interest on those debts, it's probably not the most efficient means of using their money or having to grow their money because they're just servicing the debt.
So what's your recommendation?
Well, if we're talking about tax refunds, I mean, you really want to get rid of that high interest rate debt if you can, because it's not doing you any good at 20%, 25%, 32%, depending on what you're paying. So you want to get rid of that as soon as possible so you can make your money work more efficiently, and then think about the RSPs. It doesn't mean put off saving altogether, though.
Okay, and if it is something that you can manage, there's also the potential that invest in an RSP, get some of the money back, use that as a bit of a down payment and or put that into TFSA.
Absolutely. These are great ideas. But again, I want to make sure that your viewers are using their money as efficiently as they possibly can. And sometimes that does mean paying down debt. Sometimes that does mean making small investments in their savings plan to allow the time value to grow that investment into retirement.
Jeff, how much of a concern do you have then about the high household debt levels to income? We're at 165%, is that right? That's amongst the highest in the world?
It is a big concern. And truthfully, I think what's going on is Canadians aren't saving. And even though they've got a significant amount put into their homes, and that ratio doesn't often take into account the assets that they have.
Right.
But when people say that, I say, okay, well, how liquid are those assets? Are they going to be able to get at those assets if they need it? So that measurement, yeah, it can be good, but at the same time, you got to watch what they're taking into account. We're in a hot housing market, so we're seeing assets rise, and that measurement often doesn't take that into account.
So are you then saying that 165 is actually a much higher number because it doesn't take into liquidity and or a rising rate environment?
I'm going to suggest that that's actually probably lower than that. I mean, I have to look at the math, but the reality is, I mean, if we take into account the assets that they have there, then these people are probably wealthier than that ratio is looking at.
Right. Well, what's then your recommendation? Because I think anybody listening would say, look, on paper, essentially, I've got quite a bit of money, but at the same time, too, it is being funded by an interest rate, and there is the risk that interest rates can rise, but do you want to move out of your home? I think that this is something that people have got to be thinking about.
And they could be in a position where they should be thinking about perhaps that we are living in too much home, downsizing, finding a way to take some of that money and pay off the debt that they're carrying. Because to your point, there's a huge risk if interest rates do rise. But probably more importantly is look at Alberta, look at Saskatchewan, look at Newfoundland, where things changed overnight.
Right.
And it's not something that they've been able to change or correct for a couple of years now. So you've got people that have bought too much house. They were sitting on what they thought was a fantastic asset. And then all of a sudden, they don't have a job anymore.
Right.
And they don't have savings, and that asset potentially isn't worth as much as they thought it was, and potentially there's no market to sell it in. So we want Canadians to look at probably safeguarding their financial house a little bit better than they are right now.
By doing what?
Well, potentially by looking at selling their house, by creating some savings, finding a way, even if it's small at the beginning, but creating some sort of savings and invest in that. So in case an emergency does happen, job reduction, job loss, that they don't have to dig themselves further into debt.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Good to see you. Thanks so much, Jeff.